thanks to the Commission for inviting me back again. I think the crab markets have been, price-wise, very healthy in the last year or so, but volume-wise, not so much. And so today we want to look at sort of the overall market situation and market outlook, but the one elephant in the room that we don't know about is what the volume of landings are actually going to be once the season opens in December. And as we all know, that has probably the most impact of everything on price negotiations and market forces. Hugh has introduced me as, it's been 37, 38 years. I counted 10 years in doing this Dungeness presentation, but it could be 11. Maybe I never billed Hugh for the first year. But anyway, here's what I'd like to talk about today. We want to talk about overall crab markets and sort of where Dungeness fits in. We want to talk about Dungeness supply and price. I want to talk about exports and product forms and what the implications have been of the growth of live exports to China. I want to talk about the overall seafood market situation in 2016, and particularly where crab products fit into that. And then we also want to talk about our outlook and summary on the upcoming season. So I'm going to try to do this in about 45 minutes or so and leave plenty of time for questions. But if you have a question on a particular slide, this is fairly informal, so don't hesitate to put up your hand and ask a question, and we'll go into a little more detail. So let's look at crab markets. And the first thing I want to point out is that crab markets have been extremely healthy in terms of price. This top line is a Dungeness cluster price. It's been at record levels, about $9.25, $9.50. This is a first wholesale price. And you look at this purple line, and that has been a Canadian snow crab, Gulf of St. Lawrence, which is a more premium snow crab. And you can see it's had a record price level about 2 years ago, but it hasn't really fallen off that much. And what I wanted to show you in this slide was a contrast between what's happened to crab and what's happened to shrimp and salmon. And these two other lines, this is white shrimp and this is salmon. And we've had some big price declines in other seafood products, while the crab products, by and large, have maintained or in some cases increased their price. So that's the key situation, and I don't think that's going to change very much in 2016. In other words, we're still going to have lower shrimp and salmon prices. They're not lower, they're stabilizing. They'll come up a little bit. And we're still going to have relatively high crab prices compared to their historic levels. Now, one thing that I think is really important about crab markets is that I believe there's been a general increase in value in shell crab, like Peleo, like Dungeness, to some extent king crab, in the U.S. Over the past several years. And this, I've been doing these snow crab markets for a long time, and this chart is pricing back to 1992, and that's both Alaska and Canadian prices. And what you can see here is that except for the last few years, up until recently, every time crab pricing got up to about $4.50 on a Peleo, the retailers would back away from the crab and it would collapse, and it would go right down to $3 or $3.25. But for the last 4 or 5 years, we've been really trading in a new price band, which has been about $1 higher than what it had been for the previous 15 years. And interestingly enough, I attribute part of that to the Deadliest Catch TV show. That has been so popular, and it has been such an amount of free advertising for the crab industry in general that it's really elevated the idea of crab, particularly in-shell crab, to U.S. consumers. And so you go to Florida, you can see the tours that some of these captains do, and people are really interested in crab. And it makes the retail crab buyers also comfortable with the product, and it gets very good traction, both at the retail level and at food service. And so shell crab I'm talking about, more than crab meat, but shell crab has really established itself as a highly popular product. And I think this is a classic case. Economists talk about a demand curve moving outward. And what that means is there's been a shift in the value of the product. And I think you can make a good case that for in-shell crab, Oregon Dungeness, there's been a shift in the value of that product in the North American market over the last 4 or 5 years. Now, the other thing that has been key to this has been supply. And anybody who deals with seafood prices knows that it all starts with supply. That's what's driving your market more than anything else. And in this case, if we look at snow crab, this is U.S. snow crab supply here. We've been on a slight decline in the last few years, and that has helped support the crab pricing. It's not been a dramatic decline. We're not talking 30 or 40%. But when you get to Japan, which is not a Dungeness buyer, but which is an Apelio buyer, you see the Japanese supply has come down much more significantly. And so there's been a little bit of a contraction in the global snow crab supply. And one of the questions I have in 2016 is what's going to happen to that in general. And if we look at, for 2015, I think the U.S. supply might be up a little bit when all is said and done. The Barents Sea is a new fishery on snow crab. Some of that crab is coming into the U.S. Canadian snow crab exports are up a little bit. But when we look at 2016, we have some Russian and snow crab quotas increasing and some changes in the Alaskan quota, and we obviously don't know what the Dungeness quota is going to be. So let's look at, these are new numbers. I just got them out of Russia this week. And these are the Russian 2016 crab tax compared to 2015. And what we see is there's an increase in every single species. Red crab, except for blue king crab, has remained flat. But every other species, red king crab, Bairdi, Apelio, golden king crab, is seeing an increased legal TAC in Russia. And it's not huge percentages, but overall, I think that their crab landings are going to be up about 11%. And some of that is going to be in Apelio and Bairdi crab. Also, I want to look at Alaska. This is Alaskan Apelio. It's a cut about 37%. And this is Bairdi, which has come up, but not enough to make up for the Apelio shortfall. But Bairdi is going to be a very interesting crab in the market because it's after so many years being unavailable. It's going to be at the 20 million pound level this year. And there's going to be a lot of interest in marketing that crab. It's a good competitor to Dungeness, and at the moment it's priced lower. Bairdi sections are in the $7 range, and they're currently quite a bit cheaper than a Dungeness section. So I think this crab is potentially going to be an interesting competitor for Dungeness because it's a new product. The industry in Alaska is very much trying to differentiate it from Apelio, and I think they may have some success with that. On the Apelio side, there's been a lot of controversy about why that cut was so deep. And as usual, it involves modeling that's been done by NOAA, and the modeling decisions in this case were very controversial. So there's no guarantee that next year they won't flip back to a different model and have a fairly significant impact on the TAC. Now, I just want to mention this global snow crab harvest because that's been in the light of the strong crab prices, similar to cold water shrimp, but not nearly as dramatic. We've had this general decline. This is through 2014. 2015 should be about level. But I think in 2016, despite Alaska, we'll probably see some overall increases. And where that'll come from, I expect the Canadians to be fairly stable. Barents Sea is also supposed to be fairly stable. It should come up in Russia. And also because of the strong US dollar, even if it remains flat, the U.S. is likely to take a greater market share of the available snow crab type of crab. So I think that our market supply is going to increase slightly. Now, the problem that I see for these species, Dungeness, snow crab, and scallops, and cold water shrimp, is that they're all vulnerable right now to a market correction. And the reason they're vulnerable is that all three of these species are at a historic high price level compared to what they've been in the past. In other words, they're more expensive than they ever have been. And so this has caused an erosion of the market. The less people using it, less people buying it, people trying to substitute it, take it off the menus. And the price has been maintained because the supply available is so low. And what that is, it's a setup for a correction, because as soon as a supply changes, as soon as we get a bump in supply in any one of these products, we're going to see a very rapid change in the market, because the market is adjusted to the current levels of supply. And if we get a 20% increase, just take Dungeness for example. If we get a 20% increase in landings this coming year, we're going to see a market reaction. Same thing would be true in cold water shrimp, same thing would be true in scallops. Now, most of these things are not projected to happen in 2016. I don't know about Dungeness, but if we look at cold water shrimp, it's probably bottomed out a little bit, but no dramatic increase. If we look at scallops, which I lump in here because it's just going through the same pattern, no dramatic increase in 2016, a possible increase in 2017. So I'm not anticipating any market correction on these historically high value species to any significant degree in 2016. So now let's talk more specifically about Dungeness supply and price. And this year, well, let's just talk about the key thing that we're looking at is this decline in landings. And this is total landings. This is coast-wide, including Alaska, from 2013, 14, 15. This is the monthly Dungeness landings by state. So this is our December, January. This is January. This is December, January, December, January. And you can see how it's been trending downward. And I think it's really useful in thinking about the market for 2016 to understand exactly what happened with price and supply in the prior years. And PACFIN, the data part of the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, has just revamped their database, so it's made it very easy to access historical data about price and supply by state. And so I've looked at that a little bit, which I want to go into in this section of the talk. So the first thing I want to point out is how the fall in landings, this is Oregon now, this is only Oregon, fall in landings has been met with a steady increase in the price to the vessel. These are ex-vessel prices from PACFIN. And you can see, your question is, well, what's going to happen in 2016? And it's highly correlated with, well, what's going to happen with landings, which is something that we don't know. But so far, we've seen a very strong trend of higher prices and declining landings, or declining landings leading to higher prices. This is just a market price on whole cooks. I think it's a 1.5 pound whole cook and a cluster. And you can see that we had this big jump in 2014. And then for a while they were unavailable. And when they came on the market from last year's season, this is January 2015, we had record prices, and we've drifted down a little bit in pricing since then. But what that is showing is that there's kind of a balance right now between the supply available and the price. So to give you some examples, these are public data. This is Ernerberry price quotations. The record price levels here, this was clusters at 790. It's declined to about 750, 725. Whole cooks at one time were about 680. They're now closer to 625, 650. Of course, right now at this time of year, there's nothing on the market. So these prices are not representative of what happens during the months of December when the heavy volumes come in. So now I'd like to just look at our different seasons, because all of you remember what happened in these past years. And so it's a very good, I think, framework for thinking about what might happen in 2016. So let's look at 2012. So here's our section price. It was pretty stable throughout the year. Here's our whole cook price. Here's our landings, and this is multi-state. Red is California, green is Oregon, purple is Washington, and Alaska is down here in blue. So one thing you can see here is that the prices by state are very, very similar. They don't differentiate that much once the season starts. And you can see here that there's historically every year we have a big bump up as the pace of landings declines. In January, the price goes up. And finally, down here are monthly shipments, exports of live whole cooks. So in 2012, my takeaway was the volume coast-wide was very similar to the prior year. It was about 62 million pounds versus 60 million pounds. The landings were normal in December and January. In other words, you had a December opening and then you had a lot of January landings as the fishery moved north. Live exports were beginning to be a factor, and you can see back there from that live graph that those weren't something that just happened in the spring. They happened in the December, January as well. Now in this case, we had a normal Dungeness year, but the main driver was the strength of the other crab markets, because the other crab markets were not having a normal year. There was big shortages and a big price run up, somewhat led by Japan, and all crab prices jumped up sharply that year. And so Dungeness kind of followed the pattern, even though the landings of Dungeness wouldn't have supported much change from the prior year. So that was an example of an expanding snow crab market. So if we go back to 2013, here's the same things. Here is sections. They've drifted down a bit. Here's a Gulf snow crab price. This is these are ex-vessel prices, Alaska. And again, purple is Washington, green is Oregon, red is California. And you can see that although the prices differ a little bit in December, by January they really catch up. And you can see Oregon, and this year, that was the year I think it opened around December 30th or something. And the bulk of the landings were in January. Again, we see an increase in the live exports. It's up from the prior year. And for that year, my takeaway was we again had a healthy volume, about 62 million pounds. The crab market overall was weakening a little bit. You could see that in the cluster price. The concentration of landings in January kind of affected the market because it was late getting going. So a lot of crab was on the market, and that kind of softened the wholesale price a little bit. The export volumes continued to increase. So now we're getting closer to 2016 as we move along here. If we look at 2014, here we have a big reduction from 2013 in terms of total volume. We were down I think from 60 million to approximately 40 million. I have the numbers later, but that's what I remember. And you can see the impact here. Look at this section price. It just shot up. All of a sudden, there weren't going to be sections to meet customer commitments. So prices got very high. Also, ex-vessel prices over here on this scale. Look, we started at $3 in January, very quickly went up, and all of these prices went up as the landings declined. And then, you know, our crab prices and Pelio stayed the same. So we're dealing with a shortage, and that pushed up wholesale prices. I don't see whole cook on this slide. I want to see, okay, I think I have it on the next slide. So for 2014, in December, January, landings fell by 20%. Live exports that year increased by about 9%. So we have fallen landings. We have a bigger share going to the live market. What that does is it pushes up prices, particularly to the vessels. So the Dungeness buyers were reacting to that shortfall. Snow crab prices were steady, and there was very few sections available. In fact, later that year, Erdberry stopped quoting the sections because the trade was just so thin. It wasn't possible to establish a market price. So now let's look at 2015. Okay, so here's our section price. It's high, it's drifting downward. Here's our whole cook price. Again, drifting downward slightly. And here, again, we had another big drop in production, about a 30% decline roughly from the prior year. And so we're now just at, so the short, when we had it more short in 2015, it didn't really cause that much of a dramatic reaction. The market is in balance in that sense. So for 2015, we had our landings fall. We had whole cooks and sections at record prices, going back to 1994 at least. We've had a fall in the live export volume. The amount going to China is definitely going down, and we'll talk about that in more detail. What's unclear to me is if it's going down due to Chinese market factors or if it's going down due to supply factors, because there's so little Dungeness available on the market, so some of the live shippers just can't get the product that they would otherwise get. But I also think the Chinese are reacting to the pricing, and we'll go into that in more detail. So the customers have cut back, and the wholesale prices are drifting down. So this brings us now to 2016, and of course we don't have a slide because we don't have any landings. But if the landings are similar, my takeaway from all of this is if landings in 2016 are similar, in other words, we stay close to our levels, you know, 5 or 10% change, close to our levels of the past year, market prices should remain fairly similar as well. If we get a big bump, if all of a sudden we see a big recruitment, if we see more crab coming into the pots, if we see more crab available, there's going to be a rapid adjustment of pricing because the market currently is only priced in for the level of crab that's available. And, you know, in other years I've cautioned that these prices in March through September really don't mean much because they're such small volumes. But because this has been so stable for the last 12 or 14 months, I think the market has really priced in the current volume expectations. So this is a summary slide, and then I guess we can look at the big picture. So you see what's happened here to sections. We've jumped up to this new level, but it's only supported by this much lower level of overall landings. And you can see again, these are boat prices. Here this is Washington, Oregon is green, same with the landings, California with red. And you can see that these things have tended to move together. And so this year, our big question mark is what'll happen in December, January. And that's going to drive our pricing. And it's very hard, I understand, to negotiate in advance what the value of those landings are going to be. So one of the important things I've tried to talk about in other years is product mix, because the product mix is another factor in pricing. When you have higher volumes and lower prices, you can put more Dungeness sections into the market. In 6 or 7 years ago, when we had very low prices, the Dungeness section cluster market was able to expand nationally because it became very price competitive. since then, as we've cut back in landings, it's become more of a regional market. If we look at the product mix in terms of percentage, I'm no longer comfortable kind of making estimates, but I do think we can say that the proportion of the total landings going to the live market has gone up. Proportion of the total landings going to whole cooks has gone up. Proportion of the total landings going to clusters has declined, and of course, how much goes into crab meat has declined as well. You know, it was shocking to me a year ago when I was in Seattle at one of the sort of premier crab restaurants, and I asked for a Dungeness crab meat salad, and they said they were out of it. And that was really shocking to me, but it was an example of how this crab meat has contracted. So, implications for 2016. I hope I don't repeat, but low supplies and high prices are leading to market fatigue. In other words, the market's not ready at this point to accept a whole lot more crab at these prices. The live export market is shrinking. Marketing of bear eye crab is attracting interest. Now, bear eye, there's a little bit of an issue with bear eye because the FDA says that the only legal market name for bear eye is snow crab. And yet, the way that these guys in Alaska want to sell it is by differentiating it and calling it bear eye, which is kind of becoming the trade name for it. And it's sort of being marketed as a new crab, even though, you know, obviously it was around in the 1990s. But I think this is something that is worth keeping an eye on, because it has the potential to sort of capture the imagination of a lot of chefs and a lot of high-end crab markets. And what that does is it puts pressure on Dungeness. Dungeness has been, except for the West Coast, Dungeness has been out of a lot of the national crab markets. And if we get a bump in supply and we want to go back into the national crab markets with Dungeness, one of the things that we're going to be facing this year is competition from bear eye crab, which is kind of the more exciting or new kid on the block. And, you know, and a lot of people who harvest crab obviously feel bear eye, among the paleo snow crabs, they feel that bear eye is far and away the best crab. I don't think prices can go any higher. I mean, we're at record price levels. We've already seen other seafood product prices are going down. I just don't think it's realistic to think of our Dungeness prices on whole cooks, clusters, or whatever, going any higher than they are today. And that even applies should landings go down. I think we're really at a top of the market based on adjustments, and I don't think we're looking for higher values here once we've established record prices. It's not like the stock market where you can just go up and up and up, unfortunately. Let's talk now about exports. Let's talk about exports a little bit. One of the things that really struck me is that I think the China market is going south. The live exports volumes are declining a lot faster than overall landings are declining. And so this chart shows you total landing and then what proportion of those US landings got exported. And I think this is million pounds. So here we're talking about, we've gone down to 35, 36 million pounds, but our exports year to date only 2.3 million pounds. That's not very much compared to 10 million or 11 million pounds that we saw in 2012 and 13. So something is happening here because these exports are going down faster in terms of percentage than those. And I'll show you what I think is happening in China.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Your live exports there, does that include the U.S. to Canada as well as the U.S. to Japan and China?
This slide is U.S. only. In some later slides, we're going to talk about exports to Canada and how much of those get exported to BC. But exports to Canada are down also, but that could be a function of supply. So We're going to get into the Canadian shipments as well.
So to expand on that a little bit, then your numbers in your slides so far on export do not include crab that's going to BC and then to Canada.
Then to China.
I mean to China, sorry.
Those were exports to China. Those were exports
From U.S. to China.
And more specifically, they were air shipments. Air shipments out of Seattle, Portland, and San Francisco.
Okay, but not Vancouver then.
Not Vancouver, right. But let's look at the Chinese side of this, okay? Here's what I want. I don't think the fact that, I think the Canadian exports are going down also. And these are Chinese numbers. And what they're showing is, first of all, China's imports of all live crab. And you can see that from 2011 to 2015, the amount of imports of live crab in China overall is declining. And now let's look at Dungeness. This slide includes Canada because these are Chinese imports from the US and Canada of Dungeness crab. And what we can see here is that after peaking in 2013, this is Chinese New Year celebrations, these peaks, there has been a steady erosion of the live Dungeness market according to Chinese official import figures. Now, on other products, a lot of products enter China through Vietnam and other countries, and I looked to see if we saw any indication of that from, let's say, an increase in shipments to Vietnam, for example, and we didn't. I do think that there's an issue going on in China with the Dungeness crab market, and this green line here tells you what it is. And that issue is live lobster from North America. And that live lobster market in China has really taken off. And that, despite all of the economic turmoil in China, despite the corruption crackdown, despite the devaluation of the yuan, all of these things, lobster sales to China, live lobster sales are still increasing. And they're going to be up this year again. And I think that what we're seeing here is a Chinese preference for live lobster over live crab. Yeah.
What's the price comparison of lobster? What's the ex-vessel value of lobster versus the Dungeness? Is this a substitution of taste or a substitution of price?
Good question. Let me answer first. Let me just deal with the taste part first. It is a substitution of taste in the sense that the Chinese, when we first started marketing North American lobster in China, it had a really hard time competing with the Australian lobster. And the reason was because the lobster had claws, whereas the spiny lobster doesn't. And the reason that lobster is so popular in China is because they call them dragon prawns. And dragon is the premier mythical animal. So a dragon prawn is very prestigious. But the claws got in the way. And lobsters with claws, it's sort of a misnomer to call them a dragon prawn. And so the Chinese were really thinking of the lobster as kind of a big crab culturally. And for that reason, they priced the lobsters with claws significantly less than the Australian lobsters that were spiny lobsters with no claws. So there's a price hierarchy. Now, as the live seafood market expands in China, some of that's breaking down because, king crab, live king crab is another expanding market in China. And live king crab is getting very, very good prices. So now to go to the price point of your question. A Canadian lobster, a hard shell shippable whole cook lobster, probably the ex-vessel price to the boat is about $6 Canadian, maybe $4.50 US. When it gets into China, they have a very undisciplined market, and there's a lot of competition, a lot of guys who are shipping product and accepting a lot of dead loss, and so they're selling it at a very low level. So in China, you can get that lobster from somewhere between $15 to $20, $25 a pound. Now, if you look at a Australian lobster price, and in China, a gin is what I'm talking about. A gin is their measure. It's about half a kilo, and it's very close to a pound. So when you look at Australia lobster, the market price is $80 to $100 a gin. And when you look at king crab, the live king crab price is in the $60 to $80 per gin. And Dungeness is in between a North American lobster and a king crab. There's another crab in China, the English brown crab, which also gets a lot of live shipment into China. So for whatever reason, I think that the lobsters have caught the imagination of the Chinese consumers, and especially in these middle cities, because they're building out their transport, they're building out their cold chain, they're building out, a lot of places now can really ship a live seafood much more effectively to many more markets than they could before. And so despite the fact that you have this crackdown on government banquets and things like that, the overall market is expanding rapidly. And it's also expanding the frozen market for whole cooks. Because what happens is the Chinese restaurants put the live lobsters in the tank, and then people order the lobsters and they take the frozen whole cooks from the back and serve them. So both of these are going up.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Oh, in kind of response to your question too, what I found from people I'm working with in China, they've indicated a couple of things. One is the import duties and whatnot that China has imposed that we got around a lot with Dungeness. A lot of the Dungeness was smuggled in for a long time. Well, the Australians have a free trade agreement that we don't have. So all the Australian seafood is coming in without these significant charges being hit on all our stuff going in. And the other thing that I've been told by multiple people is that the consumer, the end consumer, is walking up to the case and the lobster is a couple bucks cheaper than the crab.
Yes.
So a lot of it is just plain old, just like you and I, we go to, we either go to a high-end place or we go to Walmart, and so they're, but the duties are a huge factor, and the theory from several of my friends that have lived there for 30 plus years is that every time there's a government change, there's a crackdown, and it takes a 2 to 3 year workaround to figure out how to cheat. And so we're in the middle of that process.
I think you're right. I think you're right, first of all, that the lobster is cheaper than Dungeness. And secondly, the duty rate on Chinese seafood that's imported for consumption is about 17%. And then there's a 3% duty on top of that if they use it, if they re-export. So these guys who do re-exporting get this money back from the government. So if you are exporting, if you bring it in like a pollock and you're processing it and shipping it out again, the government not only pays you the 17%, they give you more money on top of that. But the reason for the interest in the smuggling stuff is because if you are selling it into the domestic market, they're trying to hit you with this 17% duty. And I totally agree that the crackdowns come and go, and that there is more sensitivity about smuggling some of this high-end seafood, partly because these businesses are bigger and they have a growing market and they don't want to get crosswise with the government. I think about 18 months ago, something like 200 seafood shippers were arrested in Shanghai, and that caused a couple of weeks big hiccup with Dungeness. That was not last year, that was 2014. And so I do think this live market may have some headwinds, as you said, on market price, on getting into China, and on consumer preferences for lobster. So for all of those reasons, I think we're seeing the decline. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, Joe.
Yeah.
That graph, you're reading a lot into it. It seems like it's just following the production that we've seen, the loss of production. Especially when that live market is going strong, there's been really poor production on the coast during that time. I mean, I guess my question to you would be is if there was better seasons during that last 2 years of that graph, do you think it would look like that?
I don't think it would look like that. These reasons, I think it's really hard to interpret. And that second reason there, lower Dungeness availability, yes, I think that that definitely has an impact. But the way it has an impact is in terms of price. Because if the price was lower, they would take a bigger share and keep up with their shipments and so forth. But as the price gets higher due to low availability, the shippers can't supply the same volumes that they would supply at a lower price. So I think they're related. And if you saw a higher availability, you would also see a lower price. And so the two things, it's a big ball of wax. I don't really know how to unpack it exactly, except that I think the lobster competition is a real factor. So that's my interpretation. But I agree, it's not definitive at all, because that's followed the landings down. That blue line reflects the landings as much as it reflects anything else. So I totally agree with you on that. Okay, we had some discussions about BC and Canadian exports. I just want to show you this. This is my attempt to sort of calculate all of the live product going into China, including from Canada. So the blue here at the bottom is the US export figures directly to Asia. The purple here is exports to Canada. No, sorry, the blue and the purple is exports to Canada. So you can see that we're shipping a lot of lobster to Canada, 10, 12 million pounds. But not all of that is exported. And when I look at Canadian export numbers, that's this blue here. The purple is kept in Canada, and this blue is the Canadian re-export. So to get the total exports to Asia, I would add this blue, and I'd add this one here. And you can see that even if you do that, we're still seeing a decline. Because if you just look at this blue level here, we are seeing less Canadian live exports as well. And I think that's for all the reasons we talked about. It's for price, it's for lack of availability. And 2015, whoops, let me go back here. 2015, it's year to date. I think this is only through August. And so, there's a whole 5 months more to go. So that we can't really go by this, but I still expect 2015 to be significantly down, both from Canada and from the US. So, when we have less supply, it's harder to compete in this big export market. I don't think there's any way around it. Let's just talk about the crab products briefly. This one, whole cooks, I think, as I said, I think it's increasing. It can sell at a much lower price than clusters, and that helps it in the market. It's a traditional product form. It's easy to handle, easy to distribute, has minimal processing labor. The live market, I don't want us to forget about the domestic live market, because the domestic live market is another place that takes a fairly significant quality of Dungeness. This is a market in Seattle. But when volumes are low, the live prices can get really high. Crab meat, Dungeness crab meat is not price competitive with other crab meat right now. So the people who buy it have to have a very strong selection for Dungeness. And of course that's true on the West Coast. So there is product that's shipped to China, processed into meat, and shipped back here. There's also domestic product that is packed into meat here on the coast as well. And that's it's a very good market because it has very loyal customers, but right now pricing is very, very high. And what I want to show you is what happened with the other crab meat, blue swimming crab, because that also had a availability issue where Asia, they're essentially doing a lot of overfishing, and it finally caught up with them. This is the blue swimming crab. And there was a big shortage in the market starting last year, and prices really spiked. $26 a pound for jumbo lump blue swimming crab meat, which is really, really high compared to the $16 to $18 range. And then it's come back down. And it came back down not because the Asians solved their overfishing problem, but because they had some small increases in availability. And that market had gotten so oversold, it's so high, that as soon as a little bit of crab came on that was at a lower price, a lot of importers were really hung with inventory. And there were some crab import companies that really are kind of financially shaky due to the inventory hit that they've taken on this product. And so when that happens, it tends to make buyers very, very cautious. So they don't want to repeat something like this. And that means that nobody's going to hold any Dungeness inventory at these prices. And if they have any inventory, they're going to be very, very careful about managing it, because if they get the least whiff of the idea of a lower priced product that could come in and undercut their inventory, they're going to be faced with a situation not as drastic as this, but similar. So it's going to make buyers very, very cautious when they see an increase in supply, because they don't know where the market's going to end up. And that's something we really got to keep in mind when we look at the landings for this coming year. Let me see. Oh, good. We're doing fine on time. I just want to talk about the seafood market situation overall. This is kind of where the environment in which we're operating in, and it's very positive in 2016. 2016 seafood sales are favored. We have growing retail demand. We have growing food service demand. We have lower overall seafood prices if you look at seafood price indexes. And we have a strong, health marketing message. All of those things seem to be firing well in 2016. And I think it's going to be a reasonably healthy year. If we look at restaurant sentiment, you can see it's steadily increased. And what's happened, this is a National Restaurant Association graph, and anything over this line means that the operators are expanding their sales and their traffic counts and so forth. And so for this year, we've really had, for the first time since 2006 or so, we've had really healthy food service traffic. And that's something that has been a real drag on the market for many years, and it's beginning to turn around. And so I was with a Red Lobster guy yesterday, and he said that their endless shrimp sales had just blown out the doors when they did their promotion this fall. And same with their crab promotions. They exceeded their numbers. They're seeing some very, very healthy trends after struggling for quite some time. So this restaurant sentiment's improving. The other thing that's important is when we think of the strong dollar, from an export perspective, it makes things more difficult. But from an import perspective, it helps a lot because it makes seafood products cheaper. And this is a Bureau of Labor Statistics import price graph. And what we can see here is that because of the strong dollar, our overall weighted import price of seafood has been declining. And this is also helping to support seafood sales. So those two trends, strong dollar, restaurant sales are good. And then you add retail. Retail promotions, again, this is 2015, retail promotions of seafood have really been high this summer. And if you look at crab promotions alone, crab promotions increased 26%. If you take the months, basically June through September, we had 26% more crab promotions in 2015 than we did in 2014. But this is consistent with a lot of other seafood products because the retailers are really promoting seafood right now. I think what's happened is the price basket has gotten better for them. They're seeing good traffic. They're seeing people willing to spend up a little bit of money. So if you look at all retail seafood promotions, they're up 26%. So crab is kind of in the middle of the pack. If you look at salmon, salmon's up 54% this summer. And that's because prices had come down, as I showed you in that very early graph. If we look at shrimp, shrimp promotions are up 47%. So what's happened here is the retailers are finally responding to some lower prices, and that is really driving that increase. Now, the crab increase has not been driven by lower prices. It's been driven by sort of this healthy retail demand, and they see all this traction on seafood sales, and they start promoting more. They're getting good results. Shellfish, if you look at crab, lobster, and mollusks, clams, mussels, scallops all together, up 37%. So we have a very healthy retail environment, which is supporting pricing. I want to talk about currency. This is much more important on cold water shrimp than it is on crab, but I want to compare what the outlook is for a Canadian exporter versus a U.S. exporter, because the Canadian dollar has weakened while the U.S. dollar has grown stronger. So this is Canada, and so if you look at this is the Canadian U.S. dollar, how it's gotten weaker and weaker and weaker, and also you look here, the British pound, it's gotten weaker and weaker stronger in relation to the Canadian exporter. So what this has done is it's shifted the Canadian cold water shrimp market to the UK because they have a tremendous currency advantage, whereas Denmark and the euro, which is up here, don't have the same currency advantage from the Canadian point of view as the UK does. Now let's look at the US exporter currency. What we're facing here is that with the exception of the British pound, all of the export currencies, and I think I have China on here, I'm not sure, Europe, the Japanese yen, Danish kroner, I don't have China. But you can see here that for the yen and for the euro, we're facing headwinds in terms of export markets. And on Dungeness, because it's such a high value item, I don't think that's a very controlling factor. We've had a little bit of a devaluation of the yuan, but I don't think that's driving markets on either lobster or crab. It will be a factor in the cold water shrimp market. So let's look at our outlook and our summary here, and we can have more discussion. I started out by saying we had 3 vulnerable species to price correction. I still believe that: Dungeness, cold water shrimp, and sea scallops. But there's no indication for this coming year that we're going to get a big supply increase on any of those species, including Dungeness. Although I'll show you why I think that. They have multiple years of record prices, and the market has been eroding in relation to that, but nothing's going to change until the market gets a big kick. And what that big kick generally comes from is an increase in supply. Domoic acid, this is an issue. I took this from August when Washington closed their fisheries for a little bit. And the problem is that, you have this big bloom, and we have all this warm water. We don't know the impact. I don't know, as Hugh was saying from the recent meeting, I don't know what kind of action people might take. But here's my thought on if there is a public perception problem about domoic acid, which is in other industries, when you've had a contamination problem like that, it can potentially have a significant market impact. When a study showed that there were PCBs in New Brunswick farmed salmon, or there was problems in mussels, some of those markets got hit 30 or 40% in a few weeks. Now, I don't think the crab market is vulnerable to that. And the reason I don't think it's vulnerable is because of the extremely low levels of supply. That kind of reaction tends to happen when a market has spread out into, let's say, marginal consumers or marginal buyers who, at the first whiff of a hint that something might not be right, they just run away from the product rather than investigate and see if what they're worried about is really true or not. And I think right now the Dungeness market, the supply is so low and the demand or the desire for the product is so strong that it would take a very big public relations issue for this to impact. So I don't know what's going to happen, but it's obviously a risk factor. And the whole warm water and ecological changes is a big risk factor anyway, because we don't know how that's going to affect the availability of various species. So for 2016, the harvest timing, very important. The market is used to starting up in California before Thanksgiving. It's used to a December opening in Oregon. If those things get delayed or pushed back because of meat fill or because of domoic acid or whatever, push everything into January, that puts distribution pressure on the market. So that's obviously going to be an impact. We don't know the danger of state or consumer warnings. There is a risk to the China export market, and this I think is a little more serious. You remember how China closed down the geoduck market. They closed the entire coast from Alaska all the way down through Washington because of one instance of arsenic contamination in one bay in Washington state. And the Chinese were not willing to say, oh, we want to shut down geoduck from this area. They just shut down the whole thing, and it took months of negotiations for them to open up again. If the Chinese did their own tests and decided that some Dungeness crabs exceeded their level, and in China this can be very, very political. In other words, somebody can be doing it to make a political point, not just a scientific point. They could have a reaction to the Dungeness market, and that would have a market impact because the live market has gotten very, very used to relying on a certain percentage of product going into China. So that's a risk factor, and I think we really got to be aware of that as a risk factor.
I think that's a really good point. You were talking about the shellfish closure, and there's been talk that a lot of that was tied to apple, yes. Apple export and import, and it's a really political move. They want apples in here, we don't want their apples in here, and so they reacted that way. And I think that it's very common for these regional, and they're even regional, some of the Chinese political moves, and if they're in the area where your market is, they happen overnight, so it's a real danger.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's not something we can control, because they can arbitrarily decide, oh, this is going to be a good time to do this, and make a move. So that's a risk factor on the export market. Now, what is going to happen this year? I mean, I'm not out there fishing with you guys. I'm not on the water with other species. So I went back and I took coast-wide landings from 1970 on to see what happens historically when you have a year of low abundance. And what struck me from this graph is that when you have a year of low abundance, it normally takes, here, it took a few years to recover. Here's one example in 1991 where after 1 year of low abundance, it shot back up. But what this graph tells me is that if we go by the averages here, and I know that's very dangerous, but the averages would suggest to me that we're in for a period of several years of low abundance. Now, I don't know, I'm not going to make a prediction there, but I just think that that's sort of a legitimate expectation on the part of the market. And I think that that's why the market could be so surprised on the upside if all of a sudden we had a year, a December, January here, where we jump back up to normal production after being cut 20% and then 30, after having 50% of what we normally produce. If we jump up to saying 75% of what we've had available the last few years, that's going to have a big impact on pricing. And I don't know how soon we're going to know what those what the pace of landings are and how much is going to come into the market. But that's the risk factor this year, is that we don't know the total volumes that we're dealing with. And the market is at its very peak level of what it can support. That's my opinion. So that's my best shot at what I think we need to look at. And I'm very happy to have this questions or discussion. So thank you. I have a question, which is what is the indication of volumes this year, and how soon would anybody get a feel for that?
Well, let me get my crystal ball out here.
Yeah.
The guys on the water.
Yeah.
The fact is, we're entering a whole new era in the ocean. The ocean's standing on its head right now. We have no clue what the crab are doing, because we really have never entered these waters. The warming trend out here and the different cases we've had with the red tides, or whatever you want to call it, these events we've had the last few summers, and what's going on out there right now is anybody's guess, because we've never entered these waters really. It's kind of entering new territory for us, I think.
I think you're absolutely right, but the unfortunate thing is it has an economic cost, because markets don't like surprises and they don't like volatility. And what we're facing is surprises and more volatility. And I don't know how you square that circle, because I think it makes it very, very difficult to plan a business forward, because volatility is increasing, and all of our fishery management is sort of predicated on historical behavior of stocks and species, and that's getting changed very dramatically. And in some cases, in shrimp, it's probably helping, but in other cases, we just don't know what's happening.
Right, but then we're going to have quality testing, and we're doing the domoic acid testing, so there's stability there. I mean, we're going to open on good quality product, and we'll know what the domoic acid level is if there's a danger there before we start.
Right, but it's the volume that I was thinking of more than the domoic acid. It's more the volatility in volumes that we just don't know from year to year. And I guess the market has always lived with that to a certain extent. But as the seafood industry is consolidated, and as it's well, I gotta say, even on huge volume products like shrimp and salmon, we've seen huge volatility in production. So maybe I should modify that a little bit. The market might just have to get used to the volatility.
I understand, how the market kind of shrinks as the production shrinks, John, but what happens when the pipeline's pretty empty, and there isn't enough product to supply the markets that are there? And kind of that's where Dungeness seems like it's been at, especially last year. There wasn't enough crab to supply the live markets and all the markets, so they weren't even having to promote it in areas where they could have, because they didn't have enough product to fill those markets. So it seems like there's room for some increase in production just to help the markets out.
Yes.
Still maintain the price that we started at least.
I think that's fair. I mean, I think you're right. There's not enough Dungeness crab, and the market would want more Dungeness crab. But how do they know how much more they're going to get?
Right. I mean, all we heard last year was the pipelines are empty. There's not enough to supply to fill the markets that are already in place, and that's important, because if you talk about a potential spike in production, which we're all hoping for at some point in the fishery, we're hoping to get production up, and it will happen, I believe. And we're going to have to work with the market to get the market to move with it. But I mean, there's been a serious shortage.
Oh yeah.
And they're still advertising it. I mean, on TV, you see Red Lobster and Joe's Crab Shack. They're still showing big plates of Dungeness crab on TV. They're really pushing the Dungeness crab. It's It's on people's televisions, I just don't know if it's on their plates or not.
Well, I found it interesting that this year it does seem to be on their plates, whereas in 2014 it wasn't. And I think that's where I think the market's kind of adjusted. In other words, I think that the guys now who have crab today have really been planning for it, and they step forward and say, we're going to get this much crab, we're going to pay the price, this is what we need, and they plan it out. I think in 2014 they were much more surprised. And this speaks to your point about market stability, because at this point the customers who are buying Dungeness really need it, they really want it, and they're going to continue with it. And the problem is not that they couldn't sell it. The problem, if we get more crab, the problem is not that people don't want the crab, it's that what are they going to do with the crab that they already paid a high price for? Now, luckily, with a shortage, we don't have this kind of an inventory situation. We don't have a lot of crab around, given the season and the way everything develops. So that may not be an issue, but it's hard for these guys to adjust based on their economics, not based on their desire for more crab.
Right, John, but when you start at a set price, okay, they're buying product at that level. It would just slow down the level at which that price rose. You wouldn't, it could conceivably correct downward, but we haven't seen that. When we negotiate a price at the season start, we're negotiating a price that almost always goes up from there.
It does.
I guess my take on that would be, if there is more production, the rate at which the increase is going to be slowed, or maybe even non-existent for a longer period of time, I wouldn't expect to see a price drop.
I totally agree with you. My opinion, and this is just an opinion here, is that what you really have in the sort of the structure of the fishery is a very high volume opening for a few weeks. And that's when it's economically feasible to freeze crab. That's when the production comes in, and you make your plan as to how much crab you're going to get for your customers over 6 or 9 months, because you know that in January it's going to be a lot harder to pay to freeze that crab because the price is likely going up. So it's a high volume price that you start out with, and then as the volume goes down, the markets that can, a whole cook or a fresh or a live, that can deal with rising prices more easily, they kick in. So I totally agree. If you look at all these years that I had on the chart, there's not a single year that prices fell after December, January. Right. And that's just a structural part of the fishery. There's not enough crab to support a change in price except to push it up. So I don't think that's the danger. I think the issue is, will people have confidence to establish a good price and make their commitments for sections and so forth. Yeah.
Where your opinion is that there's a stronger trending in whole cooks, do you factor in the fact that what you just said, that the viability of doing that is in December, as far as purchasing crab that you're going to cook and freeze, because the price doesn't moderate back down afterwards, and so do you see the ability to support a stronger market there? Do you think that strength is going to maintain itself?
Well, I think the market is pretty strong right now, and I'm saying if things continue as they have been, it's going to support strong opening prices, no question. But I think that because you have to look at it, step away from it, from an inventory point of view, because the guy who's buying the crab in bulk at the beginning of the season to freeze it is making an economic bet. And the basic bet they're making is that they're buying it at a level that's going to allow them to sell it through the year and so forth. And if they underestimate that and they get more demand, you can see a big spike in the wholesale prices, even though it has nothing to do with the vessel prices. Because, you know, this is price changing on product they've already bought. Now, we haven't seen this for several years, but there have been years, particularly when supply has been abundant, when the bet has gone the other way, and you start out thinking you're going to be able to buy this much to freeze and so forth, and the crab keeps coming and it keeps coming, and all of a sudden you've got more crab than you got customers. And so now you've got to either expand the number of customers and lower your price. I don't think it affects the vessel price at that point, because a lot of that crab's already landed. It takes a few weeks to settle down. So it's a risk, and it's just how you manage the risk is what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Went shopping last week, and Safeway had crab on sale fresh for $4.95. I said, how can you do that? And he says, well, we can't afford to lose the product. Then I went shopping last night. Crab was $6.95 because there was less crab around, people were buying it. And so over a year, when you buy your inventory, you're looking at your sales for that year. But if there's a big spike in product, you buy a lot frozen, you got money into it, you might get stuck a little bit. And the sales are not big sales, they're just a certain amount going out at an average pace. And so last year we got about 50% what we normally would buy. So, you know, if the sales did rise, or the production did rise a lot, it would really affect our market for sales later.
It affected in what way?
Well, when you get more crab, just like that crab the other night that was $4.95, you know, or if I go to try to sell a truckload now, you're not going to get $9.50, you're going to get a lot less money.
Right.
When the season starts, you don't really know what you're going to get. And on some of your graphs, you know, like last year we had a lot of weak crab, and that could have affected your live crab sales too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with the water temperature, again, we're going to have to worry about that problem also, especially in California.
Yeah.
I don't think those crab would make China.
Right.
You know, they're weak to start with, and then you get warmer water, and that's going to affect the quality of the crab. So it's really a tough, you know, it's tough for both of us, the processor and the fisherman, to come up with the right prices to make it work year round for all of us.
Well, one of the big market problems in California was they opened on poor quality crabs below San Francisco.
It was poor quality week, yeah.
Not because they didn't test that area. I mean, that's, you know, that's a flaw.
They never do.
Right.
Well, this year they will maybe, but yeah, no, I think that's one of the problems. But then compound it with domoic acid and warm water.
Yeah.
So your Canadian sales, what's going to happen at the borders? What's going to happen in China? You know, there's a lot of questions, I think, that we don't have answers to.
Well, the point about warm water and the quality of the crab is something I didn't touch on at all, which is actually a key point, because if the quality of the crab is such that it has to be frozen, then you might be taking in more crab than you actually originally planned to. And that's going to affect you know, how you approach your customers, and you may have to discount it a little bit from what you planned in order to move that additional volume. So yes, that'll definitely be an important factor.
Quality dictates how many whole cooks you're going to get. So if quality's poor, you're going to put them into sections, or you're going to pick them.
Okay.
Try to get rid of them. But you wouldn't want to freeze them for later because there's not enough, you know, good stuff in there.
So a lower quality crab, when you freeze it as a whole cook, doesn't keep as well. It's just, okay.
We don't even, we sort every crab, and so it has to be alive, has to have a certain weight. It doesn't make it, it doesn't go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and their shelf life is shorter too on a poorer quality product, right?
Yeah.
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 Does that apply?
The cooking process, if there's a weak crab, they just fall apart.
Okay, so it affects a fresh whole cook too. You can't take a poor crab and cook it and sell it into the fresh market.
Can't make it better.
Can't. Yeah.
John, what's the...
Wait, I got to still with it. You can do that with a lobster. In Maine, you get a shedder lobster, soft shell, poor meat fill, and the first thing they do is cook it and sell it. So, anyway, that's a different coast anyway.
Let's change your company in the next year, right?
Excuse me?
You change your company name for the next season, right?
No, they label it correctly. They call it a shedder. They call it a soft shell. They're not trying to fool anybody, but that's what they have.
John, I just wanted to ask you about that 40% reduction. I'd heard that on the paleo fishery in Alaska. Relative size to the other snow crab fisheries as far as poundage, does that fishery represent to our markets?
Okay, let's see. They, last few years, well, they bumped around. They were like 40 million pounds back in 2011-12 or something like that as well. Then they bumped up to 60, 70 million pounds, came back to 50 million pounds, and this year they're back at 38 million pounds. So the Alaska, you could say the Alaska varies between about 30 million and 60 million, 60 to 70 million, and they're on the low end of that this year. The Canadians are rock solid. They do 50,000 tons of paleo, between 48,000 and 52,000 tons, which is give or take 100 million pounds. And that's whole weight, not section weight. But 100 million pounds, and they've done that year in and year out and year in, and I don't know how that crab just keeps going, because every year you think, well, you know, you don't have recruits coming in or something's going to happen, and what happens is you get in the different fishing areas, you get a little bit of weakness, like in one fishing area in Canada this year called, it's in the southwestern part of Nova Scotia, 3PS. These guys couldn't even find the crab to catch their quota, and it was like a 6,000 ton quota. They quit fishing because there's no crab around. But other fishing areas were doing fine, and they make that up. And then in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, the crab goes up and down. So when you look at the Canadian fishery as a whole, they have been 100 million pounds a year since I've been in this business, really. At least since 2000. They've just been going steady, steady, steady. And you wait for what's going to happen in Canada. You know, one year there will be a change, but it hasn't happened yet.
On your numbers on the Veridai coming out of Russia and the proposed increases there, it's already the crab out of Russia right now is having an impact on Alaska crab, because a lot of it once again is being smuggled. It's being taken to Korea, to North Korea, to South Korea, and then to the market, and so their price is dramatically less than what you can get Alaska crab to. This is pertaining to China market live.
Right.
And I'm just curious, do you have pretty solid numbers on the probability of the biomass on the Veridai, or?
For Russia.
Yeah.
Well, the fight in Russia is who gets the crab, whether it's illegal or legal. And the Russian Crab Association is pushing to increase these legal numbers by saying, if you don't increase it and the crab is there, it's going to the poachers. And there's a political fight within Russia over the levels. But I think that over the last few years, the amount of illegal crab poaching in Russia has declined quite significantly. And a lot of this used to go to Japan, and the Japanese, they signed a port state agreement. You have to have real-time documentation. The captain has to have it faxed over from Russia at the same time he's landing, and he can't do it. So they've pretty much shut down all of that crab going into Hokkaido. In Korea, there have also been a lot of, it's shut down a lot. The center, in my view, the center of the illegal Russian crab market now is moving to the live China market in China. And that's where you hear more about sort of Russian crab that's from illegal sources. I think what happened, and I disagree with the Bering Sea crabbers about this, I mean, and Jake, they're friends of mine, but there was a very big spike of Russia illegal crab 7 or 8 years ago, and it really did crash the king crab market incredibly. But that's really kind of gone away, and lately I think there's very little illegal crab going into the U.S. market, if any. And you can also see that the king crab prices have gone up.
I'm not talking about in the U.S. market, I'm talking to China.
In China. I do think there's less illegal crab around, and I think some of the illegal crab that is going there is going to China. And I think there's some live markets opening up in China too that are taking the illegal crab. So yeah, that could be a competitive thing. Definitely.
I'm just curious as to if what the feedback is, how real it is too, or whether it's something from the past, where if the smuggling has slowed down, the rhetoric is still such that, oh yeah, we can't possibly pay that because we can get it here for so much cheaper. I don't know whether it's just the headlock or not, but
it hasn't gone away, and the reason it's slowed down, yes, but it hasn't gone away because their system runs on a system of bribery over there, and anybody who can bribe a customs agent can deal with illegal crab deliveries. And no matter how much they try, they're not going to stamp that out completely. They've made an effort and they've reduced it, but it isn't going away.
The question I had was about the comment you made earlier about the price being at a record high.
Mm-hmm.
That's not really reflective of the ex-vessel price at, say, the beginning of the season, right? Because they're buying the majority of the crab at that time at a lower level, where those spikes are during the summertime, where there's a lack thereof of crab, correct?
Actually, no, I don't agree with that. The record price I was talking about is a wholesale price, and it was for sections, and it was for whole cooks. And that actually took place in January, February of this year, when there was a lot of crab around.
But in January and February of this year, there was a real lack of crab.
Well, yes, but
So the demand for the crab was higher, right? Because people wanted it, the supply wasn't there.
Right.
So they were willing to pay the higher prices to get the crab.
Right.
But that wasn't really a reflection of what the ex-vessel price was in December, because those crabs were bought at a lower level. So the profit on that end was a lot different than...
I don't think so, because one of the things about this market is that the section price has been relatively stable for the last couple of years. So the expectation in December wasn't that the section price was going to be $6, and the expectation was the section price is going to be around its current level, over the $9 level or whatever. So I think that was built in the expectation with the ex-vessel price in December and so forth.
I kind of disagree with that. So you're
Isn't
telling...
it worth noting it was the highest ex-vessel price ever opened?
Right, but
And
what
the
I'm
highest
getting
unit
at...
Flat. It
And
went
the
flat.
highest-
Stayed there. It
And
never went up.
the highest average year
you're
ever.
not going to win this
Well,
one.
it-
I know. I've been to this rodeo a few times. I know there's no winning.
And it was flat because they wouldn't
Only the
pay.
bull
They had
wins.
to filter through
The point that I was trying to
We're
make
not
was...
negotiations yet.
We've been hearing
I'm on vacation that week.
about the ceiling price, and that
Yeah.
we're going to break the price eventually, and it's going to crash, right?
Right.
Well, I would disagree with the fact that a supplier would purchase crab based on an assumption that the price is going to be high enough that they can afford to pay us that price at the beginning of the season. Wouldn't they expect, okay, we can buy this crab at this price, we can sell it for this price, and when there's a spike in the market, they're seeing the reward of that spike, right?
It's like buying commodities.
But that's
Well, it is
The-
finding.
I mean, that's
It
their
is a
risk.
commodity.
That's their risk.
the
It is
people.
exactly
The people in the fish business who operate that way are generally traders, not processors. And a trader will try to take advantage of a change in market price, and if they see like a shrimp commodity or something that might be available, and they say, oh, in 3 months from now, I'm sure that's going to be $1 higher, they'll jump on it. But a processor is in a completely different business because they have to take in a product and they have to sell, or they have a contract with like a Joe's Crab Shack or somebody to sell so many pounds per year for the whole year. And so they got to understand up front, this is what I'm buying to guarantee that I'm going to supply that for the whole year. Because what happens if they miscalculate and they run out, let's say they run out in May or June, and they got to go back and go to Puget Sound or whatever and dig up a few loads of crab, they're paying a very, very high price because there's just not much around. So it's really different from a processor and a trader. So those guys definitely exist in the seafood industry, no question about it. But they're not the ones who own the plants.
Sure, I understand that.
Kinda.
What I was getting at is the price, that the ex-vessel price at the beginning of the season is going to reflect what this market suggests that they can sell crab for at that time.
No, not at the time. The ex-vessel price at the beginning of the season reflects the volume coming in. And we know that the volume in the first couple of weeks is generally going to be higher than the volume in the next few weeks. And so based on that volume coming in, the guy who's purchasing the crab has got to figure out, is this volume going to get me what I need in terms of frozen inventory at this price level? And they calculate what that expected price level is, and it's based on the current ex-vessel price and volume. It's not based on what an ex-vessel price might be in February.
I'd say your analogy might be more right for like a Puget Sound opening, where we're only thinking about kind of to get you to November 15th. It's such a shorter cycle. What you're saying there might be more true for a Puget Sound price, but it's not as true for all of Oregon, all of Washington, California type volume. It's the small volume, because that, I know Puget Sound is more reflective of this is the current moment today. It's not going to be a large volume. We're talking a few truckloads. It is going to sell, or we all have the intention, I think, of buying it and selling it before December 1st, when the new market sets.
Well, we saw a couple of instances throughout the spring where we had 30-hour offers at an exorbitant amount of money because they needed crab, because they had market orders they needed to fill the truck for. Mm-hmm. And sometimes
the shorter the time,
they were,
I think the more
30 hours
desperate
for, this is the price from this time to this time, unload.
The shorter that time period, the less risk involved, right? Because you're going to get it gone. Where he's saying in December, yeah, we are buying for a 12-month game. So there's a lot more uncertainty.
They hope to fill a truck, and at times I don't know that they actually got all the crab they wanted to get.
That makes sense.
No, I'm sure they didn't, because we're dealing with a market that's very, very short. Mm-hmm. And you could argue that maybe from a wholesaler perspective, the price wasn't quite high enough, because his order should have been cut down to 10 loads instead of 12 loads, because he couldn't hit the 12 loads. So.
See, and I think that's part of why we don't see the China export numbers like we did, because I don't know that, I think a lot of that crab was already committed to whole cook market or cluster market or what, and there wasn't any extra crab to export. Because the highest price here, China wasn't going to match that.
Right.
But this also was the first year China said we won't match. In 2012, it was like, name your freaking price. You go back to China and say, it's got to go up $1, and they say, okay, $2, give me the load.
But then we look at what lobster's done, and how lobsters come into play.
Okay, but lobster price has come down in China. It's not come down a lot, but it is lower this year than last year, but they're making it up on volume because they have huge volume opportunities, and so they are able to negotiate lower prices and still move their product.
So on the whole volume price thing, do you foresee, because I remember one of your earlier slides, you talked about a new ban maybe for all seafood.
Well, no, that's for snow crab.
For snow crab. Yeah. Do you see it foreseeable, not in 2016, but let's talk about 2016 through 2021, with a gradual ratchet up? Let's say we have 15% more each year for the next 5 years instead of 75% increase this year. Could we Could we hold the new band? Could we set a new floor? Is perhaps a new floor being set for crab?
Yeah.
So that there is no falling back to these dollar crabs?
Yeah, I think that's generally a true statement, because I think that, first of all, China has expanded the market tremendously. Secondly, we're seeing, retail and food service continued interest and so forth. So there is not enough crab around, period. And when people want more, it does push the value up. And I think over time, although that was for Apelio, you can look at king crab, you can look at Dungeness, you can look at, crab meat kind of had a dramatic collapse, but the shell crab, you can look at lobster. All of those species are sort of on a multi-year upward course. Right. So I think that over time, it's over the long term, you can see that very clearly. It's the year-to-year ups and downs that are very hard to predict.
Right. I think as an industry, so we're all trying to, we want to be the stock market. I guess right. we get that stock market does this, but it's generally doing always this, whereas we feel like we're just doing this flat for decades on end. It's never like overall staying up there. It's kind of the hope to.
We're in most cases, we're just matching inflation. Erna Berry has some charts about producer price index, and if you look at almost any seafood price, it's pretty much, it's not going above that general producer price index inflation.
Which is what all the Crab Commission, and we're trying to beat this inflation. We're trying to work this thing up faster than inflation.
Look at dragfish. It's the same as it was 20 years ago. Double price. You know what I mean? Crab has gone up, shrimp has gone up, salmon's gone up. So,
Hey.
But there's one very interesting difference in the dragfish and the groundfish and the shell products, and that is aquaculture. Because in the whitefish industry, the amount of aquaculture has doubled the supply.
Yeah.
Crab, nobody has been able to grow it yet. And if somebody does, then we may have a problem. But as far as Dungeness and king crab and so forth, not growing it means the value of the wild fishery is going to go up.
I think clams and just a few shellfish they've been able to duplicate.
Right. So, well, that's it? Thank you very much. And Hugh, do you want to have any?
Thank you, everybody. I just want to mention one thing. Gary Roth from ODA had to leave early, and he wanted to make sure I mentioned that negotiations are tentatively the 19th and 20th. They'll be sending out a notice. Need to make sure all the membership lists from all the fishermen get to ODA. If you need help with that, give me a call and I'll take care of it. Help you out with it.
20th in Newport here.
In Newport, right here. This room.
This room. Get to pick a balance. Those are the same days as the Seattle Fish Expo.
I don't go to that.
The fishermen, a lot of fishermen do.
I did, yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Fair enough.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.